the first one we're going to go to is our top 10 Mania moments. So similar to previous format, I'll give my five and Carl will give his five, and then we will discuss it from there. Really.
Awesome. Do you want to lead off, Anthony?
I certainly can. I'm going to lead with the first one I want to lead with, Carl, is one that I think you would have also picked. I think we had that brief discussion that I may have stole that before we got a chance. So I'm sure we can both talk about it in some detail, and that is the Seth Rollins cash-in at WrestleMania 31. So it's a very thoughtful one. It's a hell of a moment, and I think for a lot of a reason, really, in that the main event itself was actually Lesnar versus Roman Reigns. And correct me if you disagree, Carl, but this was at sort of almost the peak of the Roman Reigns hatred. You know, he'd come off winning the Rumble, and nobody wanted him to win the Rumble. And to be fair to them, when you look back at it objectively, it was a good match between the two. You know, it was an unusual step as well for WWE being very sort of PG. You know, they both ended up drawing blood when you don't get to see a lot of blood on WWE, and it wasn't sort of good because there was blood in it, but it just sort of goes to show how hard they were going at each other, really. And then obviously we got to see towards the end of the match when they're both a bit battered, a bit bruised, and we're just waiting for someone to get the pin. Seth Rollins runs down, being the Money in the Bank winner that year, cashes in his Money in the Bank opportunity, and turns the match into a triple threat. And the crowd basically just went nuts off it. I know, to be honest, I pride myself on, with movies and most anything, being able to predict something when it's going to happen. And I didn't see this coming. I'm sure there'd be people out there who reckon they did. And obviously, if you're going to predict anyone doing it, it's going to be Seth because he's the Money in the Bank holder. But the timing of it was perfect. It brought the audience back because I don't think they wanted to see Reigns win it. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, we just got to see a sort of really good sort of heel action, really, of coming in, capitalizing on a weakened pair of wrestlers, getting the curb stomp on Roman Reigns. Surprisingly, again, given WWE's stance with Reigns and that they want him to be the leader of the locker room and the face of the company, you know, it was him who took the loss that night as well. Yeah, so we got the old curb stomp and the pin on Reigns. And for me, that is, especially of recent years, one of the most shocking Mania moments for me.
Yeah, completely agree. I think similar to you, I kind of like pride myself on being able to predict when things are going to happen, and this one absolutely blindsided me. Just wasn't expecting it at all. And it was ultimately the best outcome you could possibly hope for, because, like, thinking about it, nobody really wanted Brock to still be champ because he's never there, and nobody wanted Roman Reigns to be champ because he was literally forced down everyone's throats, as you said. So it was peak hatred time for Roman, and then out of nowhere the answer arrived, and it was Seth Rollins. And I just remember the crowd erupting at this moment, you know, his music hitting, and I mean, me watching it as well, like I got goosebumps. I was like, holy shit. Like it was the biggest swerve that you know, especially in recent years. And yeah, it worked out so well. It was really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can both be a bit guilty of this, whereby as much as we love wrestling and we continue to watch wrestling, knowing the way the creative can be in WWE, and they can be so belligerent behind something that's not working, I think that's probably what added to the surprise of it. Because, correct me if you disagree, but I think we were both sort of a bit well, they're obviously going to have Reigns win it. You know, it's WWE's sort of pet project at the minute, and nothing. You know, the shock value was almost increased by the fact that we know that they have a history of pushing forward with something even when the crowd don't really want it. But I think in some respects that really helped the situation, and it's one of the few times I'll give them absolute credit for reading it and going, no, this will have a massive pop at the biggest show of the year, and they called it right. It without that moment, that would have been a lackluster end, really.
Well, that's it. I think from a predictability standpoint, you know, they're usually quite predictable. Whereas this kind of instance was, you know, I think it took everyone by surprise, and I don't even know why on reflection, because it made perfect sense. I suppose hindsight's a wonderful thing, but, you know, to have Seth come in, who was the Money in the Bank, like, I didn't even think about it until his music hit, and I was like, holy shit, this is how they're going to do it, and it was amazing. I also like the fact that it wasn't, like, simple. Like, he came in and you thought for a minute, shit, it's not going to go his way. You know what I mean? Like, they literally kind of had everybody really drawn into that moment, I think, and still not 100% know which way it was going to go, but the outcome and having like, I think they as WWE do, as they sensationalize everything, they categorized it as the biggest heist of the century. So, and it was,
Oh yeah,
it
yeah.
was amazing. So.
Oh no, it's fantastically put together, and as you can imagine, with stuff like this, you end up with the rumor mill then hitting after the fact. So I'd quite like your opinion on it, Carl. Do you think this was always intended, or do you think this was a reaction to the crowd on the night, and they've basically gone, Seth, get out there? Because there's a lot of speculation over the years that they never planned on Seth cashing in that night, and it was just something they had to do because they were losing them.
So I think this particular one, I think, was planned. I think if there ever was an audible called in a WrestleMania main event, it was probably Brock versus Roman 2, because I think that one was where they hoped to finally build Roman up and have him beat Brock, but still
Mhm.
the crowd wasn't in his favor. So I'm pretty sure Vince at that point called an audible. And you can see from the backstage segments of what happened after that match where Brock throws the title at Vince and he's very pissed off. You can see that, it just didn't go the way they wanted it to go.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll take your point on that. Yeah, so that's my first entry. I mean, for me, these are, I don't know about yourself, but my five aren't in any particular order. These are just ones I've noted. So I haven't ranked one over the other. That being said, this is probably one of the biggest ones on there. But if you're happy, I'll move on to the next one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's sound. So the next one for me, to be honest, this one is a little bit. It's definitely shocking. So it's on here, right? It's definitely memorable. So it's on this list. But I still to this day don't know how I feel about it, and that is Undertaker's streak being ended at WrestleMania 30. So for those who haven't seen it, where the fuck have you been? Uh, no, but we saw Roman Reigns and Roman Reigns. No, we didn't. We did well. We probably did see him that night. We saw Brock Lesnar face off against the Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, and much to everyone's surprise, that was the night he ended the streak, and that probably took over the night. We had matches on after that, and I honestly couldn't tell you what matches were after that. You'd have to remind me. I probably could still talk about them, but this was the takeover point in the night because I don't think anyone saw it coming. Um, the reason I'm up and down on it is, and we will later on in the week have a segment dedicated to the Undertaker streak, so I don't want to talk too much on the streak and how I think it should have gone, but I'm up and down as to whether I think Brock should have actually been the one to end the streak. I'm up and down as to whether the streak should have ended here or ended at all. And to be honest, from a technical standpoint, you have a part timer who doesn't really do very long matches and a man who is past his prime. It was never going to be a fantastic match to watch, which again, objectively, without the sort of history and the fact that we love Taker, you could argue that it probably wasn't the best match on the card, but that shock value or at the end of Reigns actually getting the pin. Reigns, I keep saying Reigns. Sorry, everyone. Of Brock actually getting the pin is it's unforgettable. To be fair, no one's ever going to forget the streak ending. But yeah, I don't know. I still can't decide if this is a memorable one for the wrong reasons. How do you feel about it, Cal?
Do you know what? I was really blindsided by this. So I think we've come to know and love Undertaker's streak, and it was never something that we ever thought we would see end.
Mm,
And for whatever reason, probably stupidly, at the time, I thought, oh, Brock Lesnar, part time, it's just another one, to another notch on Taker's belt, basically, of another name. I never, ever expected this to be the one that did it, because at the time, Brock was just coming back as, he didn't need the victory, in a sense, and he definitely didn't need to take Undertaker's streak, but he came back, and I just thought, yeah, fair play. It's going to be a good match, but it's just another one for Taker. And then the shock factor, I could not believe it. Like
mm.
literally, I was.
I distinctly recall, Carl. I distinctly recall we both at the time were like so in disbelief that we wondered whether it was a fuck up. Like that's how sort of like, really, have they really just done this? It was truly a shocker moment, and it was kind of, it wasn't massively signposted in the match itself, if you know what I mean. Like he got the pin, and you were like, wait, did that just happen? It weren't like he's F5'd him to hell, and he's clearly gonna, It was like, really shocked he didn't kick out of that one. Yeah, it was a crazy moment, and again, it is unforgettable. But I don't have a lot of opinion on the streak, to be fair. But Taker is obviously my favorite wrestler, so
Yeah, I think as you said then, it never got built up in the first place as being this could be the end of Taker's streak. It was literally a last minute thing thrown together of okay, we'll do Taker Brock. So that was one of the big reasons why I thought, oh, it's nothing. And then, as you said, it was like three F5s, I think it was in a row. And Taker's kicked out of more in the past, but like
yeah,
it got the job done, and it was just the deathly silence of that arena once Brock got the win. I mean, don't get me wrong as well. Like last minute or not, I don't know the full story, but it was executed fantastically. Like the whole Heyman thing with his head on his hands and not his head on his hands, his hands on his head. And yeah, it was just.
yeah.
I mean, it was fantastic, but at the same time, it was just so unbelievable.
It was. I mean, I think it says a lot when you say the silence, because there was a notable silence in the crowd, and you don't often get that. Crowds, especially WWE crowds, can be very vocal, and I think it just shows you the level of shock that the fact that the place just dropped in silence, and yeah, it was unforgettable.
I think as
Um,
well, I feel bad because I think it was the women's match that went on after that. And as you can
yeah,
expect, the crowd reaction never came back up until, the main event. So it
I think that's the
was,
thing. The trouble where they put it, they had to sort of build it back up then, and it's a hard slog in some respects. And I know it wasn't for the title, and historically, main event should be a title match. But I honestly think if they were going to end the streak, and it might have signposted they were going to end the streak, to be fair, but it probably should have main evented in some way. Or at least been the. I don't know how you do it, because even if it was the match right before the main event, it would have then dampened the main event. I don't know what you could have done, because that shock is too big. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, I think to be fair, they probably handled it in the right way because, if any match was going to get shit on, the women's match was the least build up, the least, interest. So it made
Yeah,
sense at the time. I think if they would have done
that's the
it
thing. It
directly
wasn't.
before the main event, it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, and it wasn't back when the women's revolution. It was getting better, but it wasn't back when it kicked off and they were sort of really big on the cards, which they are now. And like you say, it's not a thing against the women's evolution. It's just more about the fact that, like you say, they hadn't put the effort into the building of the next match anyway. So yeah, you're quite right. It's probably the best place for it in that sense, really. But yeah, so that's my number two. The only thing I would say before we move on is, and we will cover the streak in some great detail at some point. But how do you feel about the fact that it was Brock?
Um, at the time, I wasn't happy. I think with hindsight, then it made perfect sense because of the monster that the built Brock up to be. And I think at the time we didn't think he was coming back for long. We thought it was just another one-off. So
Wasn't this, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't this at the time when it was like he'd not long come off well, UFC said we could have him for a couple of matches, and he's still kind of got some sort of deal going on there, and it was sort of like he's probably heading back and that kind of mess, or is this way after that?
no, I think it was in the absolute midst of that. He hadn't decided whether or not he wanted to renew with UFC or whether he was going to come back to WWE. So it was definitely a bit of a unknown for all of us, really. So I think that was one of the main reasons why at the time we were like, oh, Brock's just come back for a payday. But then
Yeah,
to have him do that at the time, it was holy shit, I can't believe they done that. But the fact he stayed around, he's still champion today. You can kind of see why now. So I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. At the time, I was not happy at all. I wanted it to be someone who was really up and coming and to kind of build, the superstar of the future, which Brock wasn't at that time. He was just someone who was here for a payday, as far as we knew.
yeah, I
But
think that's probably what makes it frustrating, isn't it? If you think, well, he's come here for a payday, he's not going to capitalize on this, and he's just going to fuck off again. It is annoying, but like you say, now we know how long he's been back. Admittedly, still part time in a sense, but he's still put the time in. Like it's not like he's and I mean no disrespect to him. It's not like he's the Rock where he'll turn up for the big stuff and get the crowd going. He's there every other month, every month or so, something like that. It's not as day in day out as most, but he's still there quite regular compared to a lot of the part timers.
mm,
But I know for me, I'm less annoyed by it now. I will agree with you on that. I still don't think he should have been the one who took it. And I'll be honest with you, and again, we will cover this in more detail, but I still honestly think it should have been Shawn Michaels. And it would have ended the streak a lot earlier, but I think it should have been Shawn Michaels.
Okay.
But again, we will be covering the Undertaker streak as part of A2theKnia, so I will cover my reasoning for that down the line. So moving on, the next one I've got is WrestleMania 30. Again, actually, surprisingly, I didn't realize these were on the same. This is the thing with time, isn't it? 'Cause I didn't realize these were on the same WrestleMania. I'm referring to. Have I got that right? Actually, anyway, I'm referring to Daniel Bryan's win, basically at Mania, the real underdog story that was sort of built up. This is one of the rare times for me that I've seen the sort of authority angle, in a sense, work. Because it got a bit stale after the Attitude Era. But basically, we saw Bryan have two matches that night. He had a match against Triple H to earn himself the right to be part of the main event, and then we got to see him obviously enter into the main event with Batista and Randy Orton at the time, who was the champ, and take the win. So it was a fantastic thing to see. It was fantastic to see the crowd really get behind him, and obviously we were getting behind him the whole time. But it's memorable not just for the Mania night itself, but for the way it was built up. Sort of, it became, I don't know, it didn't feel like kayfabe, if that makes sense. It felt like they weren't interested. And this is where, again, that speculation sort of comes in as to, did they always intend on building Bryan up this way? Because he, at the Royal Rumble time, he was in a match against Daniel Bryan, didn't enter the Rumble at all, to the point that fans were notably pissed off that he didn't enter the Rumble. I think there was a lot of expectation. I know you and me certainly speculated at the time that he was going to be an entry, not signposted, a surprise of sorts. And then obviously Rey Mysterio came in at number 30, and then it became fairly obvious, right? Bryan's not going to enter the Rumble. And then we obviously saw Batista win the Rumble. And this was a return for Batista as well, so you expect a bigger pop. But everyone, including ourselves, was so behind Bryan that you wonder whether it was they were sort of compelled to because of the fan response, or whether it was always the plan. I don't know. But it's memorable for that, for me, that it was a bit of an unusual setup, that it weren't the traditional, win at the Royal Rumble, go on to Mania and win. It wasn't that sort of underdog build-up story. It had this real sort of air to, like, no, we don't want Bryan in the title scene, and that felt kind of real, felt kind of raw. How do you feel on that one?
Yeah, I think similar to Kofi, really, the kind of trajectory of Bryan was built based on the fans. I don't think Vince ever kind of planned on having him main event anything, because in Vince's eyes, Bryan's still just a little small nerdy, wrestler that he has to have on the books for the smarks more than anything else. But I think the fact that the fans got really behind him and basically forced a change, forced him to change his hand, basically off the back of that response. So I don't think they ever kind of had anything long term planned to do it the way they did it. I think it was because of that fan reaction that they went that way.
So do you think it's fair to say then, at the Royal Rumble, they never intended Bryan to go to the title picture?
No, I don't think it was even a thing. They thought they had a massive coup with bringing Batista back, and then obviously they shat on him.
Yep.
As they did every time they brought him back, really, which you've got to kind of feel bad for Batista, really, because it wasn't really his fault. But yeah, I think it was definitely a pivot on their part from expecting Batista to go over, and he just didn't, because he wasn't Daniel Bryan. And at this time, it was very much a shift in the fans not kind of accepting what WWE were trying to force down their throats, and more like, this is the guy we want. It was one of the very few times in recent history where they really got the voice across, and that was the ultimate deciding factor. I think they had to change the story massively for Mania.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think they might have had an idea where they were going come Elimination Chamber. Because I find the Elimination Chamber somewhat forgettable, to be honest. But Bryan was at a much more prominent position by then. It was definitely not signposted for at that point, but he was in the title picture by then. So it sort of got to a point that you're like, okay, they might be building a story here, because obviously he didn't win Elimination Chamber, so he was again not in the picture for Mania. But then it felt a bit more deliberate as a, all right, we're booking this so that you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, He's still not one, you know. So I think they probably had the story maybe built out towards Elimination Chamber. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it certainly felt like that for me.
No, definitely. I think he had a very similar path as Kofi, because I think Kofi had the same sort of thing where we expected him to get the opportunity earlier and he just didn't get it, and then it was literally he had to jump through hoops and he had to get the New Day to fight for him, this that and the other, in order for him to be able to get his shot. And I think for Brian it was the same thing. You know, the fan reaction happened at Royal Rumble, so they kind of tested the waters a bit at Chamber. And then it was similar stuff again. So we're like, okay, shit, we really need to put him in the main event.
Yeah, and it's I mean, to be fair, I think it was the biggest moment for the Yes movement as well when he won, and he obviously celebrated after the fact. The crowd were just going crazy for it, and it was wonderful to see. I'm a sucker for a good underdog story anyway, but it was a great one to watch, and again unforgettable for that reason.
Well, that's it. I think, you know, the fan reaction, as you've said, it was literally everyone in the audience were doing the yes chant and the yes arms and stuff, and it was, you know, the camera zoomed out and it was literally the whole arena, and it was definitely a fantastic moment.
Yeah, it's one of them moments you don't often get, and one he'll never forget, and I think we'll never forget, to be fair. So speaking of unforgettable matches, Gal, the next one, I don't have a great deal to say on the match itself, but just the fact that it happened, and that's WrestleMania 18, in which we saw The Rock versus Hulk Hogan, which obviously two of the biggest wrestlers from different generations, and I always find it odd now that the sort of almost. You could disagree with me on this, but like they always build up like the John Cena stuff as like John Cena versus The Rock once in a lifetime. But this, to me, this is the once in a lifetime thing right here. Like Hulk Hogan was the biggest name in the industry for so long, and really speaking, who would have expected that you get to see him go against The Rock? He was obviously past his prime. He had a great sort of insurgence after it as well, because obviously the match itself, he went into it as a heel. He was part of the NWO, and then that hell of a match between the two of them, and that show of respect at the end of it, and that big crowd pop, that sort of brought back the Hollywood Hulk Hogan sort of gimmick, and then obviously they sort of built on that following that. The only sad thing with Hulk Hogan is that they sort of ended it weirdly with that. What did he call himself? Captain? It wasn't Captain America. It was like Mr. America.
Mr. America. Yeah.
That was fucking weird. But getting to see, and again, he was an old timer, but he was putting the work in at the time. But getting to see that match and that build up, and then that sort of follow through with seeing that one last, possibly not one last, knowing Hulk Hogan, but that one last run for Hogan in the WWE. It was fantastic to see. But yeah, again, I'm not a great deal to say on the match itself. It's more the fact that you know there was a time you wouldn't expect to see those two face each other in the ring.
Yeah, I think this was prime WWE. It's what they do well. They built up a story that just got everyone invested. It was like a generational thing. It was icon versus icon, and it really was, you know, a massive match at the time, because it was something you never thought you would see. It was like Hogan, who was prime in early 90s, versus The Rock, who was prime in early 2000s, and it was something that, you know, people would probably play on WWE video games and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, it is. That's what you're saying. It's like playing like using the legends in WWE, like 2K20 or whatever now, using the legends to build some crazy matches. It felt like one of those sort of things. Even in the sense of like, this is a type of match that, again, correct me if you disagree, Carl, but this is something that both you and your dad could appreciate, because you're both wrestling fans, and your dad definitely knew Hulk Hogan, probably not The Rock so much. It's strange that it's generationally in that sense that you can both appreciate the characters in this match.
I mean, that's it. It was like, you know, my dad was never really a massive Hogan fan, but he was never really a massive Rock fan either, to be fair. But
yeah.
He knew Hogan, and he knew what he was, and he sort of knew The Rock, because that was kind of the time he fell out of it. So, you know, my dad was one who was very interested in this match, and it was for that reason, because of the massive generational gap. And I think, you know, from a storytelling standpoint in WWE, it was, you know, amazing the way they brought Hogan into it as a heel and had The Rock as the face, and it was WWE versus WCW in a sense. And then, you know, everything that they went through, ultimately it was the fans who turned Hogan. It wasn't necessarily what they did in the match. It was the fans reacting to Hogan and kind of pushing for the Hulkamania and for the Hulk Hogan of old that kind of led to that kind of change and led to him leaving the NWO eventually. So it was something that, you know, you could only expect to see at WrestleMania, and I think that's why it was such a you know, one of the best WrestleMania moments. It just had so much going on, and it had such a good payoff at the end.
Oh yeah, and it's one of them where you couldn't really, thinking back, you couldn't see Hogan go out as a heel, because obviously he was getting towards retirement, and you couldn't have seen him not go back to the Hulkamania era or the style before doing that. So it was just a perfect moment to turn that around when they showed each other that respect and the audience got behind it. That was a perfect time to turn him face as well, and it just worked beautifully going forward. As I say, until they fucked it up with the Mr. America stuff, but nevertheless. So I'll move on to my last one, and again, apologies because I am a sucker for an underdog story, and this isn't an underdog story per se, in the sense of the way we explain Brian's. This I'm referring to WrestleMania 20, just in which we saw both Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit take the two top titles. Obviously Eddie winning the WWE title and Chris winning the world title. And for me, it's the fact that they were both, and it sort of goes back to what you've said a couple of times in previous podcasts about you had your IC title for your workers, and these were both workers. You know, they were both on that scene, and it was nice to see them sort of reach that pinnacle, that top title tier. And just that coincidence, I don't know if it was deliberate booking effort, but they both sort of attained that top level title on the same night. And obviously they were really good friends, and we got to see them sort of embrace each other at the end when they both sort of I think Eddie come out when Benoit took the win, and you got to see them sort of both embrace that they both reached that point together, and you can get behind that, and you sort of almost get emotional with it, because obviously I started as I've mentioned before at the age of 11, so I was there at the sort of maybe mid to end of Attitude Era, but I knew Chris Benoit and Eddie quite well at that point, and it was brilliant to see the sort of build up to that. Do you know what I mean? In that sense that, you know, they truly earned those title shots, they truly earned the win, and however long their title reign lasts, that moment itself is ingrained really in Mania. Sadly, given what happened with Benoit more than Eddie, obviously sadly they're both not with us anymore, but sadly the story behind Chris Benoit, the WWE try and avoid any sort of reference to him, which is a shame. And I don't obviously want to sort of give a pass on everything he did, but at the same time, you know, he was a memorable character in WWE, and it's a shame we can't sort of, you know, embrace the Chris Benoit the wrestler in that sense, because you won't really get this match talked about, this Mania talked about all too much for that reason.
Yeah, I think this was probably the first time that WWE, I mean, first time in a long time at least, where, you know, historically WWE backs the big burly kind of, you know, superstar, if you will, and this was the first time where you got to see the two guys on top of the world, where former WCW guys, former like pretty much borderline cruiserweight guys, and they were the real workhorses. They were the most technical. They put on, you know, real, you know, hard working matches, and I think it was so emotional of a moment, because for their kind of story careers at that time, they'd both come, you know, they'd both been in Japan, they'd been in Mexico, they'd been in WCW, fought the way up, they'd, you know, survived WCW to the point it went out of business, and then, you know, they never thought WWE would take a chance on them, and, you know, they did, and they kind of won over management to the point where both of them ended up winning the major WWE titles at WrestleMania. You know, it was two ex-WCW guys, small guys, I think they were like 5'10", 5'9".
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Definitely didn't fit the WWE mold. And, you know, you could see the real emotion between the pair of them. It was something you kind of felt like you'd been on that journey with them of, you know, fucking hell, years ago we thought we'd be out of a job, and now here we are, we're on top of the WWE. It was something they never felt was attainable. And, you know, you could just really see it come across.
Yeah, I think that's how you end up getting behind it so much, and it's not it wasn't a story per se that they built up over a few months. It was something that we've been watching for years, and like you say, it almost a moment that gives you chills really in that sense to sort of see them reach that and get behind them on that. Again, such a sad sort of following really for the pair of them. And again, I think it's a bit of a shame because you don't see this one talked about. And I could be wrong, but I think the reason you don't see it talked about too much is because the name Chris Benoit crops up, and they try and avoid that as best they can.
That's it. I mean, it is a huge shame for wrestling as a sport, as an entertainment art form, really, because Benoit was one of the best, and there's no denying that, really. And it is just such a shame that the circumstances that happened meant that his name has had to kind of be erased from history because the work he put in, the matches he had, was some of the best. Some of the stuff he did with Angle, some of the stuff he's done over the years was just really top level stuff, and it is a shame that we can't really talk about him in that light. But at the same time, you kind of you understand why. But
that's the trouble. It's a difficult line to tread, and I get why WWE do what they do. But there's a lot of history there that you have to sort of avoid, which is a real shame. But it's sort of a bum note to end on that, really. But that's my 5. If you want to go into yours, Cal.
Yeah, sure. So again, similar to yourself, there's no real particular order to these. I think I was just kind of trying to pick out. It's so hard, isn't it? To pick 5 from 36 years of WrestleManias. It's a really hard task, but I think
I dare say harder for you, Carl, because obviously I don't have 36 manias. I have what I can't remember what my first mania was, if I'm honest. But again, it'll have probably been late 90s, late 90s. So I've got considerably less manias to consider than yourself, to be fair. So I don't envy you this task, mate.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely been difficult. That being said, I think there's only 1 or 2 from like the early years, to be fair, which is quite surprising, really, when I think about it. But I am going to start with one from the very early days of WrestleManias, and that is WrestleMania 3. So this one, in terms of WrestleMania, so WrestleMania 1 was obviously the biggest showcase of them all. WrestleMania 2 was a bit of a fuck up, to be perfectly honest, by by WWE standards. They got it really wrong. They decided to go bigger than what they did on WrestleMania 1. They, tried to do it in 3 different locations, and each location got a different main event, and it was just awful. It was really bad. But WrestleMania 3, I think, was probably the best of them all at that time. It really kind of brought itself back from the shortcomings of WrestleMania 2, and there was really good matches on the card. But the big kind of moment that really defined that WrestleMania was the whole Hogan Andre. So this was a match that was built up. It was something that you must see at the time. It was, I think they built it as the unstoppable force met the immovable object, and it really was that. Hogan never loses at WrestleMania by this point, and Andre was, he's a fucking giant. He's huge. Yeah. So it was such a kind of enthralling match to kind of see that. I mean, and let's be honest, the match itself was not a fantastic match by any stretch. It was 2 really big guys. It was slow. It was very kind of rest holdy. It was, it wasn't great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it featured a man whose finisher was the leg drop. Neither of them were known for being technically gifted, and obviously I can't talk too much on the pair of them because I weren't there for the heyday of it. But I've seen this particular match. I've seen that moment, and I sort of have an idea of both the wrestlers, and I think it's fair to say that it was never going to be a technical showcase. That really.
No, I think for the spectacle of it all, it was, the number 1 babyface in the world against, someone who you really legitimately felt he couldn't beat, which at the time was something new, because if you look at the past 2 WrestleManias, it was very clear Hogan would win, whereas this one you kind of didn't really know where it was going to go. And to be honest, Hogan took an ass kicking, throughout the whole match. It was literally Andre was on top throughout the whole thing, and you could see the fans. I think at the time, fans were a lot more into the product than they are today, really. And, they were really, they were going through it with Hogan. They could see, like, oh my God, this is going to be the one where he actually loses. So the kind of spectacle of it all was just incredible, because you got to see this story where, the man who's normally on top and it's everyone's favorite in Hulk Hogan was really the underdog in this case. And you actually thought he was going to lose for the first time, but he managed to kind of pull off the impossible and body slam Andre the Giant. And, Andre was fucking huge. He was bigger than Big Show. You know what I mean? So it's at the time, it was like, oh my God, this is insane. And don't get me wrong, they build it as this is the first time as Andre had ever got Power Slam, which completely wasn't the case because Andre had worked Japan, Andre had worked, other matches that were, not televised where everyone was fucking throwing him around. But for the mass audience in a spectacle like WrestleMania, the story they built up was Andre the Giant had never been taken off his feet. And then to see Hulk Hogan, in this case, the underdog who was a massive baby face to kind of pick him up and body slam him, you could just see you felt the energy, you felt the reaction of the fans kind of go, oh, I can't believe he's done it. Like, so.
And like you say, I think they were fortunate that the internet wasn't a big thing. So it's not like you could research it. Most people just took their word on it when they said he's never been taken off his feet. With hindsight now, you can look into it and say, yeah, he'd done Japan and such. Which, to be honest, is I didn't actually know that, but I never knew Andre actually did Japan or anything like that. But it just shows you that they can play. They knew how to play it at the time, didn't they?
That's it. I mean, even Hogan. People think of Hulk Hogan as he's got like 3 or 4 moves to do, similar to John Cena, but he worked Japan and he was doing fucking Enzuiguris, he was doing Hurricane Ranas. It's like it's crazy the kind of contrast in the product that WWF kind of put out versus what the wrestlers were actually capable of doing at that time, especially for the likes of Hulk Hogan, where they kind of told him, this is the way you need to work, and this is kind of your big spots, and you need to do them like every week and every time you're shown. So, yeah, it was crazy.
Unreal, yeah. Again, I would never have known, but it just shows you, and they knew what they were doing, because why sort of make them take riskier shots when Hulk Hogan obviously could get the crowd behind him with the moveset he had, so there's no point in doing anything that's going to potentially injure you. And they knew what they were doing at the time. I sadly can't say that for WWE at the moment, but they knew what they were doing at the time, clearly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was, people always talk about the first WrestleMania as like the big kind of turning point, and then people seem to forget that WrestleMania 2 was a failure. But for me, WrestleMania 3 and this particular moment, which was, the slam head around the world, that was what really catapulted WrestleMania as a must-see kind of yearly event.
Yeah, like you say, with the fuck up of 2, 3 was the one that cemented it as the biggest show.
Yeah, so, yeah, I thought, had to mention that considering the kind of grand kind of scale of the action. Then the next one on my list was a lot more recent, but still not super recent, which was WrestleMania 17. So this was Austin versus Rock, and it was the second match between the two. So they previously faced off at WrestleMania 15, where kind of Rock was the heel and Austin was the good guy, and it was a fantastic match. It really was. And they knew after that match that it was money and they could build on it and do kind of a repeat. So they didn't do it the following year. They waited 2 years, did a WrestleMania 17. So this one was slightly different. So they were both sort of in tweener roles. So The Rock was very much a fan favorite this time as opposed to a heel. But Austin, no one ever hated Austin, whether he was a good guy or bad guy. You just couldn't hate Austin because of the character he was. But this one was it was crazy because this was, we'd lived through the Austin McMahon era where Austin and McMahon hated each other, despised each other. They couldn't be in the same room. Every time they were near each other, they'd kind of try and go for each other's throats. Whereas in this match, it was a really close contest, and then Vince McMahon comes down the aisle, and you think, oh God, what's he going to do now? Is he going to screw Austin? And then it was actually the complete opposite, and he helped Austin, and Austin kind of turned heel in this match. And I think it was just the shock of it all to find that, after everything we've watched over the years of Austin and McMahon literally hating each other, to then see them two on the same page and ultimately shaking hands at the end of the match, when Austin goes over The Rock again. So, this is 2 matches now in the space of 3 years, and both times Austin had gone over. So you kind of expected to a degree, because Austin went over in the first time, The Rock would get the rub in the second. But, it was insane to kind of, because I think at the time WWE were very notorious for kind of doing, these kind of interferences and, people getting involved in matches and stuff like that. So you instantly assume when Vince came down that, oh God, he's going to help The Rock beat Austin. So it was like a massive turn and shock when he supported Stone Cold.
Yeah, I think, like you say, it was put together really well because, when you look at Austin, like whenever they show you Austin's sort of highlights, as it were, from his career, most of it is around his feud with Vince McMahon, or his distaste for the authority figures. Like some of the memorable moments, like Austin hitting him with the bedpan and stuff like that. So you can really see why the shock value was there for that sort of that heel turn and that sort of relationship, as it were. So yeah, I get why that is probably one of the more memorable. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, crazy. I think watching it live as well. I just remember having my head in my hands, just in shock by what I was seeing. So it was definitely a big standout for me.
Oh yeah, definitely. Again, it's sadly for me, it's one of them. I don't even know if I watched that live. It's some of the things I've seen where it'd be highlights after the fact. I don't know if I don't think I was putting as much effort into Mania at that point, certainly. But yeah, I can only imagine the impact it must have had live at the time.
Yeah, honestly, it was mad. So next one on my list is HBK versus Ric Flair, WrestleMania 24. So this one, I mean, I grew up watching Ric Flair. From my earliest memories of like 91, 92, when I was like 3 years old, Ric Flair was up there as like the top guy. So I've always loved Ric Flair because he was my dad's favorite wrestler for a point, and then naturally you kind of resonate with him as well, which is,
of course, yeah.
He was never a good guy either, because my dad always would root for the bad guys, typical of him. And then I kind of went that way as well, with like my favorite wrestlers of being the likes of Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect, and some really good heels in there. But I'd kind of followed his career since the really early days. I was never a WCW guy. I didn't really follow him then, but since he came into WWF at the time as the real world champion, he was definitely one of my favorites. And I followed him since then, as he went back to WCW, as he came back to WWE, and throughout all that kind of thing. And a match that I always wanted to see was Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels. So to see it play out at WrestleMania, it just made perfect sense. But it had the added sweetener, or added bonus, if you will, of it being, the potential to retire Ric Flair, because his career was on the line at the end of it. And I think it's one of them, Ric Flair at the time, you hear his career's on the line, you pretty much know he's going to lose the match. But, to kind of go through that, roller coaster that was the match. And I think the thing that stood out the most was, the way they built it, because Rick just carried on. He was fighting through all of it, and he was pretty much out on his feet, and he was still saying to Shawn, like, no, I'm not giving up. Come on, give me what you've got. And like Shawn even mouthed to him, like, I'm sorry, before he hit him with that final Sweet Chin Music. I'm not the most emotional person ever, but at the same time, I felt myself welling up in this match, because you could see Rick, like his bottom lip start to kind of tremble, and you can see how much it meant to him, because, in his head, this was his retirement match, and he knew he wasn't going to get the opportunity to do this again. And, you kind of resonate with him to see him go through that and see how much it meant to him. And, you've been following his career for fucking God knows how many years. And,
yeah.
I felt myself at the time just getting really kind of emotional seeing it all unfold. And, it's still to this day is one of the things that stands out to me as one of the best Mania moments of all time, because just how much it affected me.
No, I totally agree with that, to be honest, mate. I mean, it gets you where you live, that. And it is a very emotional moment, and you can see it's emotional between the two of them. And to be fair to Rick, I know he's been back since, but that was, for me, that was pretty much the end of his in-ring career, at least in any substantive way. I know he's had appearances here and there, and he's been in the ring since, and we'll ignore TNA. But that was that I think that was pretty much the end of his regular in-ring career. Because I'm correct in saying this WrestleMania was after he came back as the co-owner of WWE, and was there on a regular weekly basis for a good while.
Yeah, this was literally towards the end of his tenure in wrestling. He'd done the whole commissioner thing, he'd done the evolution thing, and he was literally just on his final kind of swan song. And yeah, it was just crazy to see it, because I'd followed Rick for years. I'd seen the rise of Shawn Michaels. I'll be honest, and don't get me wrong, Shawn Michaels is fantastic. He's one of the best performers ever, but I've never liked him, mainly because of the stuff he did to Brett has had a massive kind of influence on my kind of feelings towards him. But
I get that. I mean, to be honest, he's got a history of being a bit of a tit. I think even he'd admit that he was never the nicest person in the past. He's found Christianity now or something, hasn't he? But he was, I don't think he was well liked by a lot of people anyway. So I get why you can get behind he's not a likable person. So I do understand that.
Yeah, but I think, fairness to him, he is definitely, he's got the moniker of Mr. WrestleMania, and, the quality and caliber of matches he's had at WrestleMania kind of speak for themselves. And this was just another one on his another feather in his cap, really, because it was a fantastic story.
Well, this is, I did tip to it before, but this is one of the reasons that I honestly felt that he should have been the one who took Taker's streak, because it's genuinely one of the best Taker matches I've seen at WrestleMania as well.
Well, I think that's a nice little segue, to be honest, onto my next one. Because my next one on the list was in terms of the best moments, was the first time that Shawn Michaels and Undertaker squared off. So it was WrestleMania 25, and I just think it's mainly like the match itself was fantastic. Don't get me wrong, but the kind of build for this match is what I'm kind of talking about here, where it was literally, they depicted heaven versus hell. And it was, Shawn Michaels was born again Christian. He'd seen the error of his ways. And, he kind of literally in his entrance descended from the heavens, wearing all white and, very much kind of the kind of godlike Christianity-like thing. And then Undertaker, the very kind of polar opposite to that, came from the floor as though he was coming from hell, dressed in all black. And I just think from a visual standpoint, it was just beautifully executed, in the sense of considering that both of their stories, it just made so much sense.
That really did. And from a match standpoint, I think they both got the best out of each other. It was fantastic to watch. And I don't know, it almost felt to me like the perfect moment for that streak to end. If you were going to end the streak, the other option for me at the time was don't end it at all. But it was, the storyline was built up so well. I even alluded to some of the elements of the storyline where Shawn weren't falling for the Undertaker's tricks, and how it mirrored in the way Goldberg was treating the Fiend quite recently. And I do think that they've probably took some cues from that. But the whole build up, the whole story was iconic. The match is definitely unforgettable, and I hands down, one of the it's on your list, but I'm saying this but it is one of the best Undertaker matches I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think the actual execution of the match as well. So obviously they ran this back the following year, and I think this one was the much better wrestling match, and it had a much better kind of entrance and kind of heaven versus hell slant on it. But the second one that they played back the following year had there was a lot more at stake, because it was for Shawn Michaels' career and stuff like that. But I still firmly believe it's kind of a Marmite thing in terms of which one do you prefer, the first one or the second one. And I think the second one always had more at stake, but the first one always meant more to me, just because of the kind of thematics of it, and the fact it was the first time we saw it, and ultimately the match quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, I always lean towards the first one myself, purely for that reason, that this was the first time we saw it, and not that the second one weren't good, to the fact that it's even in that debate as which one was better. But to me, this was, I don't know, not that the second one was predictable, but in a sense, we had been there before. So I don't think you can beat the first time they squared off.
No, definitely. It's mad as well to think that it's so many years later on in both of their careers that they finally had this match, because those guys have been around since, God knows what WrestleMania, really, really early on. So
yeah, it is funny that, really, isn't it, that you think they potentially could have squared off a lot sooner. But to be honest, that could be a whole list in itself of people who sort of either never squared off who should have, or waited till way later on in their careers than they should have, because there's certainly been a couple of, I think you've mentioned a couple previously, where it's it's hard to believe that they never faced each other and so on like that. And it's certainly one of them where you think it stuck till WrestleMania 25 for that match to happen. In some respects, it's a bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely a future podcast for us to kind of talk through those things. I think one match I was made aware of quite recently, not to kind of diverge too much, was we actually got to see Bret Hart versus The Rock. which I wasn't even aware of at one point. So that match actually did happen at one point in The Rock's early career. So it's crazy to think of the dream matches that actually have happened at some point, just not necessarily on like a grand scale.
Yeah, they either happened too soon or because I imagine that wasn't a bigger deal because it was at the early onslaught of The Rock's career.
Yeah,
So it wasn't sort of booked as a big deal. Whereas it'd be a massive deal now. Well, not now
exactly.
because Brett's not really in a condition to wrestle, but
Yeah, definitely. And then the last one on my list to kind of round up my five is, again, a nice segue. It was WrestleMania 13, which was Stone Cold versus Bret Hart. And this, I mean, I don't want to give spoilers away for when we talk about our favorite ever WrestleMania matches, but let's just say this is one of mine. And honestly, this match is incredible. It was the best executed double turn of all time. So going into this match, Stone Cold was meant to be the heel, Bret Hart was meant to be the babyface, as he's always been, and this was kind of the first pivotal moment, really, in the culture shift in WWF at the time, where the fans were getting behind the likes of Stone Cold and the ones that you should be booing for the actions that they're doing, but they're cheering them. And then
mm,
you've got like the baby faces of old, like your Hulk Hogan's and your Bret Hart's, basically, of the ones who were always good and do right, where fans didn't want to see that anymore. It was literally the dawn of the Attitude Era, and this was the best double turn I've ever seen because Bret goes into it the good guy, Austin the bad guy, and the way they played out the match, and don't get me wrong, the match was fantastic as well, but the story behind it was it was like a grudge match between the two of them, and ultimately it ended up in a sharpshooter from Bret, and to build Stone Cold up, they didn't want to make him tap out, so they had him pass out, and basically they ended the match, and this has got one of the most kind of iconic visuals for me as well because Stone Cold's busted open at this time, and you can see part of the match where Bret Hart really sinks in the sharpshooter, and Austin, you can just see him squeezing, like writhing in pain, and the blood squirting from his head, and it's just such a beautiful kind of image of a match, and
mm,
ultimately he ends up passing out, and Bret wins the match, and it was such a good way to do it because Austin didn't look weak, he didn't tap, but then Bret basically decided, you know what, I'm not happy with it, and started to kind of take it out on Austin, and go at him with a steel chair afterwards and attack his injured knee, thus kind of turning himself heel and cementing the tweener that was Austin into the face. And
yeah.
it was just from a story standpoint and a match standpoint, it was definitely the best thing I've ever seen at WrestleMania.
Yeah. No, I think it's a fair point. I mean, again, this WrestleMania 13, I never saw. That was slightly before my time, really. But I've since seen this match. But what I find more interesting for the likes of myself, for the layman, is that that image or that clip of Austin bloodied and like you say, rather than pain, is iconic. It's cemented. It's one of those things that they always show in clips. It like even quick video packages at the beginning of WWE and stuff like that. It's always amongst it. It's always there, and it's one image that even if, like for me, who never saw the match at the time and was fairly new to wrestling around that point, even I sort of know that image is an iconic thing. And am I correct in saying this is when sort of this is sort of what propelled Austin into the sort of the main or one of the top guys of the show?
Yeah, this was definitely like the turning moment for both of them, really, because this kind of launched Austin's career basically.
Mm.
Because before that he was just starting to get over, and the fans were starting to get behind it. But after this, it literally catapulted him into the main event as the top babyface, and it also in hindsight, unfortunately, kind of led to Bret Hart's really strange heel run where he ended up being pro Canada and anti USA and kind of
I wonder who wrote that storyline.
yeah, exactly. So kind of screwed him up a little bit, but Austin is very kind of appreciative of what Bret did for him in this match, and kind of if it wasn't for this, I don't think Austin would have ever been the guy that he ended up being, and ultimately ended up saving WWE.
I dare say there are two things that that you could sort of credit to Austin being so popular. I think this is one, and obviously the Austin 316 moment at King of the Ring was probably the other. That's that people always class as iconic, and that's what sort of made him sort of so endeared to the audience. And you probably have more authority to talk on those than I do, but certainly two that are always mentioned with Austin.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The whole promo we did with the 316 after he beat Jake at King of the Ring was, the first kind of stepping stone to his stardom, and then I think this was the final kind of nail in the coffin of what made him really is the top guy. And it was just so well done, and the pair of them, they put on a fantastic match. They told a really good story, and it went above and beyond the result that they were expecting, I think.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing, not to digress into the modern product and digress into complaining, which I'm trying not to do too much about WWE. But this is the type of stuff that they're missing when it comes to like trying to push people like Becky Lynch as a badass. This is how you do it. Something like this, where no one can disagree now about Austin being a badass after that. Like he refused to quit, even to the point that he ended up having to pass out. And it's that sort of thing that I'm not saying they should definitely, I don't want them to go, quote for quote or completely mirror Austin's career, which we are seeing sort of hints of it with Becky. But this is the type of thing that it's like that's how you're meant to book it, where that, don't say die attitude. That's how you get them over as a badass when you're trying to put that across,
Well, that's it. I think today they're scared of letting the kind of top stars or the top baby faces lose, when really, they can still lose if it's done right. And this was a prime example of someone that, Austin lost that match, but he didn't come off bad because he didn't give up. He literally passed out, which is fine, and people could respect that. So, it's one of the best kind of stories that they told, really, especially in that kind of time frame.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Again, definitely iconic, definitely one that for me coming into wrestling is one of the things I've had to look back on. I've not, and it's on me little sort of bucket list to go back and watch every WrestleMania just so I'm clued in. I've still not done that, although I could because the WWE Network is currently free.
How much is that again?
Completely free. Sign up today or tomorrow. Fuck it, it's free. But yeah, and it's sort of on my list to do. But even without ever going back and watching them all, certain things I've seen, certain matches I've seen, this has to be one of them that you have to go back as a new fan. You have to go back and look at it. If you've never seen Austin versus Brett at WrestleMania 13, and you're a fan of the current product, you should go back and watch it. It's just a fantastic watch.
Definitely, and I think if you are going to go back and watch every WrestleMania, just skip 11.
11 and
just
2.
Skip 11. 11 and 2.
I'm intrigued there, Carl. It'll probably be for another podcast, but I'm intrigued as to why I need to skip 11 now.
Yeah.
In fact, that'll be the next one. We'll just say, why should I skip 11? And that can be a podcast in itself.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know if there's enough time in the world for me to talk about why you should skip 11, but don't watch it.
Yeah. And obviously, you can all order your Skip 11 t-shirts at A2theKnia.com. So that brings us to the end of our top 10 most memorable Mania moments. I keep up and down as to say most memorable. Yeah, most memorable is the right way of putting it. But yeah, these are certainly for us. I always like doing these lists with you, Carl, because you have a lot more history with the product, and it's nice to see that it sort of plays quite well because you bring in some of the stuff that I've missed that I probably now need to see. Do you know what I mean? So it's always useful for me. You're giving me a nice little list of things that I'm like, right, I've got to go back and watch that. That sounds boss.
Do you know what though as well? I think because you kind of got into it slightly later than me, you kind of make me appreciate those times more because I'm kind of stuck in the past a little bit of like my favorite years are like 92 and stuff like that. But you kind of you remind me of some of the stuff that they did in the later years that actually were awesome. So it always kind of makes me think, you know what? I need to cut them some slack sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, especially in the modern day, especially with social media and the like being a very toxic place at times. It's easy to sort of jump on all the stuff that they're doing wrong. and you can see it. I mean, you can jump on Reddit now or Instagram or anything. You can see the amount of people who hate what WWE are doing, even in the midst of what's happening right now. And I know we do moan a fair bit on the podcast, but it is a difficult situation for everyone, and it's nice to sort of take stock. And that's one of the things that's good about these lists. It's nice to take stock of some of the stuff that they've done that has really worked. And you can appreciate they're not always going to be winners when they make these story decisions, but you know, you can really see that there's some absolute gold in there. Yeah,
Definitely. Let's hope WrestleMania 36 brings us some more. Although optimism is not high at the moment, but who knows?
it's one of them. I mean, it's going to be memorable, but not for the right reasons. It's going to be a very, very difficult Mania for them, and one we'll never forget. But just because it's going to be so fucking strange, it's going to be even just the lack of audience. It's going to be so surreal. But you know, join us on Friday, or is it Saturday or Sunday? Join us all weekend for WrestleMania.
it's so big that it's every day for the foreseeable future.
Well, it's yeah. So, but no, it's obviously we always plan to watch these things together as well, and everyone's on quarantine now in the good old Great Britain, so we'll be watching it through Skype most likely. But again, even that in itself will make it a bit strange. So that's the end of that segment, Carl.